Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about judicial review. We are on day 3 of the judicial branch. We're going kind of slow because we're doing this far away from each other. So today, judicial review, we're going to talk about a required Supreme Court case, which is Marbury versus Madison. It's super important that you guys know Marbury versus Madison. And then we are going to talk about how something that is not in the Constitution has become what one of the branches does. It is their job to do judicial review. However, there's nothing in Article 2 about what judicial review is. So these two guys, on the left-hand side is Marbury, on the right-hand side is Madison. Their portraits actually are in the Supreme Court's private dining room, which we talked about last time. They actually do have a little dining room where they hang out and they come up with their discuss list and stuff like that. They are important because the Constitution does not talk about what the Supreme Court should do. It talks about the fact that there is a judicial branch. It talks about the fact that there is rules that need to be followed, but Congress gets to create them. Congress gets to come up with all of the judicial branch stuff. So it's very vague as to what the Supreme Court will do. And it's going to be in 1803, with this particular case we're about to talk about, that the Supreme Court actually gets a job. They figure out this is what we're supposed to do. So Marbury and Madison, their portraits do hang in the dining room as kind of, remembrance of how the Supreme Court actually got their job. So this gentleman is John Marshall. He is going to be the Chief Justice at the time. This is going to be in 1803. So we have been a country for, 11-ish, 12-ish years. So we're new, and the jobs that these different branches are going to be doing are also new. So a couple of things. One, Marbury versus Madison, required Supreme Court case. The Chief Justice, the guy on the left right there, his name is John Marshall. He is a Federalist. Now remember, interesting thing about the judicial branch is you're supposed to have blinders on. Justice is blind. However, every Supreme Court justice is chosen by a president, and that president has political leanings. Therefore, there's a good chance that that same justice that the president is picking also has those same political leanings. So they all do have opinions. They're just not supposed to let us know what they are. So in this case, Marbury versus Madison in 1803, that is where judicial review is going to be established. And it is the power of the Supreme Court to declare laws unconstitutional. That's a huge job, and it's a lot of responsibility to have to do that. So let's talk about this case, how it came up, what exactly it is. So this is what you would find, we've done these case briefs before where you guys see all of the different pieces, the facts of the case, and so on and so forth. I want to let you guys kind of look at the facts of the case. I want to talk about it though. So Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams in the 1800 election. So big deal. Somebody defeated somebody, and any of y'all Hamilton fans, Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams. So before Jefferson took office in March of 1801, Adams and the Congress are going to pass what's called the Judiciary Act of 1801. This is going to create new courts, it's going to add new judges, and it's going to give the president more control over appointment of judges. The act basically was essentially an attempt by Adams and his party to frustrate the next guy, okay, to frustrate his successor. As he used the act to appoint 16 new circuit court judges and 42 new justices of the peace. To give you an idea of what a justice of the peace is, it's you can get married by a justice of the peace. Instead of going to a church, you can go to the court and get married. And that's what one of the jobs of the justice of the peace. So these appointees are going to be approved by the Senate, but they are not going to be valid until their commissions or their jobs were delivered by the Secretary of State. So William Marbury, let's talk about our first guy in our verses here. William Marbury, he was appointed Justice of the Peace in the District of Columbia. So Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. He's going to be the Justice of the Peace there, but his commission or his orders from the president were not delivered. Marbury is going to petition the Supreme Court to basically tell the new Secretary of State, who is James Madison, hey, I'm supposed to have a job here. You need to deliver my documents so I can have my job. Marbury, joined by 3 other appointees, are going to petition what is called a writ of mandamus, compelling the delivery of these commissions. Now, the weird piece is that they basically refuse them. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. So it's kind of weird that something that started never gets finished, because we go from one president to a new president to that new president's people, and the new president's people say, we're not going to do that. So anyway, the question that is going to arise is, there's actually 3, and it says it right here. 1, is Marbury entitled to his appointment? So the former president is going to say, this is what I want to happen. The new president is going to say, no, we're not going to do that. My people, my new people, we're not going to do the stuff for the old president, even though what took place happened while the old president was still president. Question 2, is his lawsuit the correct way to get this done? Should he even be in the Supreme Court, for that matter? And the last one, is the Supreme Court the place for Marbury to get relief from his requests? Like, he has these questions, he has his job he's supposed to have, but he's not getting them because the new president and the new president's people are like, we're not going to do that. So the end result is it's going to be 6 votes for Madison, 0 for Marbury. So Marbury does lose this case. And this is what they're going to use. They're going to use pieces of the Judiciary Act of 1789, Section 13 specifically. So to question 1, is Marbury entitled to his appointment? Yes. Is the lawsuit the correct way to go about it? Yes. But number 3, is the Supreme Court the best place to be there to ask this question and get it done? It depends. The justices are going to hold, through Marshall's forceful argument, that on the last issue, the Constitution was the fundamental and paramount law of the nation, and that an act of the legislature repugnant to the Constitution is void. In other words, when the Constitution, our document, conflicts with an act of the legislature, that it's invalid. So basically what's going to end up happening is, 1, Marbury doesn't get his job. So he's a little butthurt about that. 2, they decide that this law, this act, the Judiciary Act of 1789, isn't even a valid law. So they've been practicing something that the Supreme Court is like, this isn't even valid. So why does this matter? Why do we care about this, man and his wanting of his job that he's supposed to have? It's because what the court does. This is going to be the first time in our history where the court looks at a law and determines it is not constitutional. Okay? First time judicial review has ever happened. And oh my gosh, we now know what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. This is their job. So that's why it's a big deal. Nobody really cares about Marbury and his wanting of his justice of the peace job, honestly. But what they do know is, we know now what the Supreme Court can do based on somebody and their silly little problems, basically. It sounds kind of funny. So the minutia, the small bits and pieces of this case are not really relevant. The big piece is that the Supreme Court takes a law, looks at that law, compares it to the Constitution, and goes, wait a second, this law shouldn't even exist. That is judicial review, determining the constitutionality or the unconstitutionality of a law. So the verdict, Supreme Court refuses to grant him his position. Why? Because the Judiciary Act of 1789, which sets up the federal court system in the first place, was unconstitutional and void. So, long story short, he doesn't get his job, and then now we see why the court does what it does. Now, the lasting impact, again, going back, this is the first time that the Supreme Court overturns an act of Congress. The first time they've looked at a law and said, wait a second, that ain't right. It's going to show checks and balances actually working. And it's not until this time that the judicial branch even realizes this is what their job is. So judicial review, it's a big deal, and it goes back to this case. That is the importance of this case. Marbury wanting his job, very unimportant. The important piece is what actually happens because of the case. So judicial review, it's important because it allows the court to interpret the words of laws and interpret the words of the Constitution. This is also a sticky spot for the judicial branch, specifically the Supreme Court, because my interpretation may be different from your interpretation, may be different from someone else's interpretation. And that's why things like politics and the presidents who choose new people to be appointed into these positions of the justices, that their interpretation really does matter. Because if their politics plays into their interpretation, then that means, you know, my beliefs of something may not be what their beliefs are. So they're going to see things very differently from me. We're going to talk about some of these cases that's a big deal, like Roe versus Wade. We're going to talk about that probably in a couple of weeks, which is dealing with abortion rights. You know, my interpretation of abortion rights, no, we're not debating it, is going to be different from somebody else's. And then when you have people that are on the court that make decisions about things like abortion rights, that's a big deal. That's a big responsibility for them. And that's something they can do. So it's a huge power they actually have as well. Now, within the Constitution, though, there is nothing about judicial review. So it's kind of interesting that it's what they do, but it's not in the Constitution. In the Constitution, there's nothing explicit that says anything about it. It gives federal courts the power of judicial review, nor is there language that denies them that. So that's why they say they can and they do judicial review or deem things constitutional or unconstitutional, because it doesn't say not to, but it also doesn't say do. So it's kind of it's some wiggle room that they have within the document. And if we go back to the founders creating the document, everything was broadly written on purpose. So there was wiggle room. Now, was that their intent here? That's up for us to kind of debate and figure out. So I did want to talk about another case just because it's interesting and it kind of shows judicial review as it happens. And it's dealing with something concerning you guys, your rights as students. So in 1984, it's a Supreme Court case called New Jersey versus TLO. TLO stands for it's someone's initials. It's a minor's initials, so it doesn't say the person's name. It is a female, though. This is not a required case, but I just find it interesting, and it shows judicial review, and it has to do with you guys. So this is going to be in Piscataway High School. Piscataway is way up north. And basic facts about the case. You have a 14-year-old girl. She's going to be accused of smoking in the girls' bathroom. Big deal, right? Who cares? And what's going to happen, though, is that the principal at the school is going to question her, and is going to search her purse. And in the purse, there's drug paraphernalia. So can he do that? Can the principal do that, or she do that? That's the big deal. Did the search violate the 4th and 14th Amendment? So this shows you something that the Supreme Court would actually have to do. They're going to have to look at, okay, this is the case. This is what happened. Kid smoking in the bathroom, purse checked, boom. There's way worse stuff in there than cigarettes. And does the principal doing that violate that student's rights? The 4th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, okay? So the decision that's going to happen in the court is it's going to be 6 votes for New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, versus TLO, 3 votes against the state of New Jersey. So 6-3 means that TLO, the student, the 14-year-old girl, her rights were not violated. So what does that mean for you guys? Can the principal do that? Absolutely. So as far as the question, did the search violate her 4th and 14th Amendment rights? Nope. And the court says that basically, because you're on school grounds, that you have less rights within that particular area. Searches that are dealing with probable cause are going to be what you need as an administrator. So if the administrator thinks you might have something, there's some kind of cause, somebody said, I think so-and-so has something in their purse. Yes, they can check it. You cannot refuse it. Done stamp. Your rights are not violated. So it's kind of interesting that you have different rights based on age and where you are. If you're hanging out at school doing stuff, you don't have to have the same due process that, say, you would have if you were in your car and got stopped by a police officer. very different situations, basically. So you have less rights when you're hanging out at school. Okay, so I have a couple of things on here. Judicial review, like I said, the way that I just showed it is there was a case and it was brought to a court system. It was going to be brought to a court system in Piscataway. That end result got to an appeals court, which then moved its way up into the court system. If you go back to how the Supreme Court works, it has to make its way to the Supreme Court system. And they deemed it as something that was, something they needed to look into. Students' rights, what are your rights as a student? And it's interesting to see how a court 100 years ago may have said very different things about this particular case than they did in 1984. Same thing today. It might have a very different end result depending on the people that are in the court. So I have a couple of videos that I have in this PowerPoint. One of them is from Justice Clarence Thomas. That's that lovely gentleman right there. It is linked, so you guys can go ahead and look at it. And he kind of talks about what he thinks judicial review is and his job as a justice. The next one that I have is also going to be, it's a linked video. You have to search that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's going to talk about what she believes the impact of Marbury versus Madison is on her and her job. If y'all remember Ruth, she's kind of my favorite. Look how cute she is. Okay, guys, so that's basically it about judicial review. You do need to know Marbury versus Madison. You do need to know its importance. Again, the minutia of Marbury versus Madison doesn't much matter. However, the stuff that does matter is the big stuff. What actually came of that? It was the fact that they looked at a law and they determined, is this law constitutional or not, concerning Marbury's issues. But it wasn't necessarily about Marbury. It was about, is this law even something we should be practicing? And they said, nope, it is definitely not. So it's kind of interesting that sometimes, stuff definitely changes in terms of what is, happening. So anyway, on my website, I want to make sure you guys know what's going on. Let me share a new screen. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my website. So we are on right here, Marbury versus Madison. That is the PowerPoint I just went over. This actually is a link to something that's in the HyperDoc as well. I know it's a weird name, Kitty Kicks a Giggle Blue Robot, but it's dealing with judicial review. The 3 important videos, they're all important, but the 3 videos I think you guys should watch always, Khan Academy, because they do such great explanation, but also these 2 top ones, Marbury versus Madison from the History Channel and Marbury versus Madison from the Bill of Rights Institute. They're both similar in length and stuff, just depends on which one you want to watch. The bottom 2, not as super duper important, but if you're still confused about Marbury versus Madison, there is Hip Hughes, and there's also going to be the crash course that's up there. So I would suggest you guys definitely do those top 3, and if you're still confused, check out the 2 bottom ones. Now, next time I see you guys, hopefully, we're going to have a live session. I'm going to try and plan it for Wednesday around 3, maybe 4. I will send a reminder with a join code for it. I will probably be set up and whatnot about 10 minutes before it should start. And I want to talk about Federalist 78. So what this means is everybody who is A-Day, you guys got a physical sheet, sheets from College Board about analyzing Federalist 78. Everybody on B-Day, I sent something on Google Classroom, which is a document that you can actually type on. Since you guys were not here Monday, me either, of last week because we got booted out of the school because of the coronavirus. So I have a couple of things on there. It will be a Zoom live discussion, hoping for 3 p.m. Check Remind, check Google Classroom for join codes. And remember, all classroom rules apply. Be polite, do not cuss, and wait to speak. I can mute everybody, so please wait to speak. I don't need a whole bunch of people yelling, screaming, and saying what's up to each other. We'll have a moment for that, but we don't need to all have that happening all at the same time. It will drive me crazy. All right, so that's it for today. Hopefully you guys watch, you pay attention, you understand a little bit about judicial review, watch those videos. And then next thing after our live session on Federalist 78, we will deal with what's called activism and restraint. Activism and restraint is how the justices actually decide stuff. And it's interesting because it plays into the politics of everything. Remember, it starts from a president. President belongs to a political party. They choose somebody that's going to be most like them or will judge things based how they would want things to be judged. Even though justice is blind, it's really not. All right, see you guys later. Also, I'll keep you guys posted on what's going on Instagram too, for those of y'all that are following my weirdness on Instagram. So see y'all.